Every image you've ever seen of the deep ocean floor, every documentary, every photograph, every frame of footage ever recorded down there adds up to about 1,000th of 1% of it. Not 1%, 1,000th of 1%, which means that if the entire deep sea floor were the size of a country, everything human eyes have directly observed of it would fit inside a small town, and the rest is a blank you've simply been trained not to notice. By the end of this, you'll understand why the least explored place in the solar system isn't on another planet, it's on this one. Most of it is closer to you than the nearest large city, and the reason nobody has looked is stranger than you would guess. Start with the number, because it was only properly measured very recently. In 2025, a team of researchers led by Catherine Bell published an analysis in Science Advances that did something nobody had bothered to do before. They gathered records of essentially every deep sea dive ever made, by submersible, by remote vehicle, by towed camera, going back to the 1950s, and added up the total area that had actually been seen. The figure came out around 0.001% of the deep sea floor. And it gets worse, because those dives aren't spread out. Roughly 2/3 of all of them happened within the waters of just 3 countries, and a handful of research institutions account for most of the rest. So the ocean hasn't been explored, it's been sampled in a few favorite places over and over. Now the part that trips people up. Mapping isn't the same thing as seeing, and the difference matters enormously. If you look at a map of the seafloor, it appears complete. There are ridges, trenches, mountains, plains, all rendered in detail. Almost none of that came from a camera. Most of it came from satellites measuring the height of the sea surface, because a large underwater mountain has enough gravitational pull to heap up a few extra meters of water above it. And from that bulge, the shape below can be inferred. It's a spectacular technique and it's very blurry, resolving features around a kilometer across at best. An underwater volcano shows up, a hydrothermal vent, a shipwreck, a canyon full of unknown animals doesn't. The effort to fix that is called Seabed 2030, a project run with the Nippon Foundation and the International Bathymetric Chart Organization, aiming to map the entire ocean floor properly with ships and sonar by the end of this decade. When it started in 2017, about 6% of the seafloor had been mapped to modern resolution. It's now somewhere above a quarter. That's genuine progress, and it still means 3/4 of the solid surface of your planet has never been measured at the resolution you would consider basic on land, which raises an obvious question. Why not just go? Because of what the water does to anything that enters it. Pressure in the ocean increases by roughly 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth. So at the bottom of the deepest trench, nearly 11 kilometers down, a vehicle is holding back over 1,000 atmospheres, which is somewhere around 8 tons pressing on every square inch of its hull. There's no light below about a kilometer, so everything must be carried. And the water blocks radio entirely, which means no vehicle down there can be steered by wireless signal, no GPS works, and communication happens through slow acoustic pulses or a physical cable running all the way back to a ship. That's why the milestone that everyone remembers happened over 60 years ago, and then didn't happen again for decades. In January 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh climbed into a vessel called the Trieste and descended into the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench. It took nearly 5 hours to sink. Partway down, a window cracked with a bang that shook the whole cabin, and they continued anyway. At the bottom, the impact of landing stirred up so much sediment that they could barely see, and they had time for about 20 minutes on the seafloor before starting back up. 2 people reached the deepest point on Earth in 1960, and then nobody returned for 52 years. In the same span, 12 people walked on the moon. The moon, at that point, was better documented than the bottom of your own planet. The next visit came in 2012, when James Cameron sank alone in a purpose-built vessel and spent about 3 hours on the bottom, and after that the descents became slightly less rare. In 2019, the investor Victor Vescovo ran an expedition that reached the deepest point of all 5 oceans in a single year, returning to the Challenger Deep repeatedly. That expedition cataloged several animals that had never been described by science, and alongside them, sitting on the seafloor at nearly 11 kilometers down, a plastic bag and some sweet wrappers. The deepest place on Earth had been reached by human rubbish before it had been reached by more than a handful of human beings, so what is actually down there in the 99.999% nobody has looked at? Consider what happened the last time anyone looked somewhere new. In 1977, a team including the geologist Jack Corliss took a submersible down to the Galapagos Rift to study volcanic activity on the seafloor. They were geologists, expecting rock. What their lights found instead were chimneys of superheated mineral water, and around them, in permanent darkness, an entire crowded ecosystem. Clams the size of dinner plates, crabs, and tube worms, taller than a person with blood-red plumes in a place with no sunlight, and therefore, according to everything then understood, no possible source of food. The explanation took years and came from a graduate student. Colleen Cavanaugh, then at Harvard, worked out that the giant tube worms have no mouth and no gut at all, and instead carry billions of bacteria inside their bodies that convert the hydrogen sulfide venting from the seafloor into energy, not photosynthesis, chemosynthesis, an entire foundation of life that doesn't need the sun in any way. One dive in one small patch of seafloor, and biology had to be rewritten. That happened because somebody pointed a light at a place nobody had pointed a light before. And there are millions of square kilometers left where that has still never been done. Which is why marine biologists still describe roughly 2,000 species new to science every single year, decade after decade, with no sign of the rate slowing down. There's also the problem of what the deep sea does to observers. Edith Witter, who studies bioluminescence, spent years frustrated that submersibles came back with so little footage of large animals, and eventually concluded the vehicles themselves were the problem. Loud, floodlit machines that scare away anything with sense. So she built a quiet camera platform with a ring of blue lights, imitating the distress display of a jellyfish, dropped it in the dark, and in 2012 used it to capture the first footage of a living giant squid in its own habitat. Everyone had been looking. The looking was the thing that kept it hidden, which is the shape of the whole problem. It's not that the deep ocean is hostile, though it is. It's that the tools built to visit it are enormous, expensive, few in number, and concentrated in the hands of a small group of institutions in a small number of countries, all going back to roughly the same places, and the timing matters now more than it used to because permits for deep-sea mining are being negotiated for parts of the seafloor that no camera has ever visited. Decisions are being made about ecosystems nobody has seen, based on maps assembled from the shape of the water overhead. So the next time you see footage of the deep ocean floor, hold this in your head. Everything ever recorded down there, all of it put together, adds up to 1,000th of 1%, and the other 99.999 isn't far away, or unreachable, or alien. It's right there. Under the water, you can already see from the shore.